Today I'm going to show you my 20 favorite metallic eyeshadows from Pat McGrath. We're going to do this desktop style because I really just think the focus should be on the eyeshadows themselves. There's really no need to see my face in the frame today. I'm basically expanding on an idea from a video that I saw Martina do a while ago, Martina Lily. I will link her video in the description box below. She basically showed her top 10 metallic shades from Pat McGrath Labs, and I figured there's really no way I can only pick 10 because I'm kind of using the excuse that I have more palettes than Martina, so I'm entitled to have more choices, which is why we're doing my top 20. That makes absolutely amazing metallic eyeshadows. I think there is really no question about that. So even picking 20 was already quite difficult for me, but I really tried to choose the creme de la creme, the absolute, makes my heart flutter kind of eyeshadow. So without further ramblings, I'm just going to jump right into it. Also, by the way, these are not ranked or anything. There's really no rhyme or reason to the order in which I'm going to show these to you. I just basically sat down and thought about what my favorite metallic eyeshadows are from Pat McGrath, and obviously the first palette that came to mind and a lot of the favorites that I have from Pat McGrath in terms of metallic eyeshadows are going to come from this stunning Decadence palette. Decadence is a very unique palette in Pat McGrath's mothership range because it is the only palette that kind of contains only like one type of texture, which is a varying degree of a metallic shade, ranging from like a more of a satin shimmer type to really like creamy, vibrant, extremely punchy metallics. So, like I said, without any rhyme or reason to the order, let's start with one of my absolute favorite eyeshadows from Pat, which is the shade Gold Standard. I think I'm basically just going to do like swatches of each eyeshadow here on the back of my hand, then shift my hand a little bit in the light, so if there are any duochromes you can catch them. So I'm not going to do swatches like this because I just find it a bit more awkward with the angle of my camera. So hopefully you don't mind that you're just going to see them one by one. But now let's talk about Gold Standard. Gold Standard is sort of the quintessential Pat Gold. It's in a number of her palettes and it is basically the gold shade because I think you can also quite clearly appreciate if you look at this eyeshadow. It is literally gold in an eyeshadow. It looks like you took gold, then you melted it at a really high temperature, and this is what you are left with. I really love this eyeshadow. Gold Standard really isn't everyone's cup of tea. I know from a lot of people that they dislike the strong yellow undertones this eyeshadow has. Personally, I never really minded this eyeshadow. I think it just looks absolutely beautiful on the lids. It flatters my complexion, it flatters my eye color, so I've never really had an issue with Gold Standard, and I never really minded having it in multiple palettes because I truly feel joy when I use it. So, my next favorite metallic from Pat is in fact the one that stands right next to Gold Standard. This is the shade Inferno, right here, and Inferno has to be one of the absolute most unique eyeshadows that Mother has ever graced us with. This is a copper bronzy type of shadow, but what makes it very interesting and very unique, and hopefully you're going to see that once I start shifting my hand here in the light, is that there is a depth to the base color of this eyeshadow. There is a little bit of, I don't know, like a dark taupe brown grace sort of base, which makes this eyeshadow incredibly unique and very versatile. I really like using this eyeshadow as a one and done precisely because of how much depth it gives you when you shift your head in the light. So if you put it on your lids, for example, once the light hits directly into the eyeshadow, you're going to see this beautiful like coppery color, but at the same time in the outer corners of your eyes you're going to also get a little bit of that depth, creating the effect that you have used two different eyeshadows when in fact you've really only used the one. This is a beautiful eyeshadow and definitely one that I feel like is quite underrated in Pat McGrath's portfolio because I don't really hear people talking about it much, but honestly I think it is one of the most unique eyeshadows in her collection. Continuing on our Decadence adventure, right underneath Inferno we have another one of my favorites and an absolute classic, I think a legendary eyeshadow from Pat McGrath, which is this beautiful teal blue here called Lapis Luxury. Lapis Luxury is just gorgeous. It has the most amazing blue sheen to it, and what I really like about this eyeshadow is that it doesn't really lean too green. It has beautiful like vibrant light blue sparkles in it. This is a rich vibrant color, the type of eyeshadow that you look at and you almost want to eat. FYI, every time I open this palette, I do actually experience sort of like drooling effects because there is cocoa powder worked into the formula of these eyeshadows. So whenever I open my Decadence palette, I immediately catch a whiff of that cocoa powder and I start salivating. Right next to Lapis Luxury, we have my next favorite, which is the shade Divine Mink. I've spoken about the Divine Mink so many times on my channel that if you've been around for a good amount of time, you will have seen me use and rave about this eyeshadow for the absolute longest time. Divine Mink is the most interesting taupe eyeshadow. It has this like gunmetal-y, taupey overlay, but what makes it again so interesting and so unique is that sort of like navy blue base to it. I don't know whether you can see when I shift my hand in the light. Depending on how the light catches it, you will either see that almost like silvery taupe shine, but then again, in certain lighting, you will catch a little bit of that navy blue base. And again, this is another one of those eyeshadows that is so versatile because of that depth and complexity and richness to the tones. You can use it as a one and done eyeshadow, and again it will create the effect as if you have used multiple eyeshadows. I just find Divine Mink to be such a unique eyeshadow. There's really nothing quite like it that I have seen before. Most of the time when people interpret a taupe eyeshadow, you will see a lot of like gunmetal-y type colors or like browny silvery type colors, but there is just such uniqueness to the tone of Divine Mink. Like, I'm looking at it right now and in this lighting it almost looks a little bit purple. It is just such a magnificent eyeshadow. What is also magnificent about this eyeshadow, my friend Meg likes to call this eyeshadow Sacred Weasel, and I cackle every time I see her use it and refer to it as Sacred Weasel. And by now you're probably thinking, Mariam, are we just going to be swatching the Decadence palette? Woman, get a life. I promise you we're almost done. There's only one eyeshadow in here that I cannot not mention as one of my top favorites because it is somewhere in the top 5 of my favorite eyeshadows from Pat McGrath, and that is this just fabulous, magnificent piece of art, the shade Sinful. Look at this. Look at the shine. Look at the tone. So this eyeshadow is a very interesting take on sage green because it has sage green tones to it, but at the same time there is a little bit of a gold overlay. And what I also find interesting about this eyeshadow is that it resides somewhere between being a cool or a warm tone depending on the eyeshadows and the colors that you surround it with. And this eyeshadow in particular looks as shiny on your lids as it does right now on my swatch. It is literally blindingly beautiful. A video about my favorite metallic eyeshadows from Pat McGrath would never be complete if I did not include the shade Metallurgy here from the Metamorphosis 6 pan. I am so sorry, I know this eyeshadow palette has been gone for a really long time. This specific shade has never been re-promoted, but I will continue talking about it because the matter of fact is it is one of my favorite metallic eyeshadows from Pat McGrath Labs. Look at this beautiful, unique, neutral eyeshadow. This is what I want from Pat McGrath. This is, I think, Pat McGrath at her best, giving us colors that are unique with like undertones that you have never seen before, with that beautiful shine. And may I just point out, this eyeshadow is 5 years old. I've had this palette since 2018, so it is nearing 5 years old, and you can see how extremely creamy, rich, vibrant and shiny it remains 5 years later, which is, I think, a testament to the quality of Pat McGrath's eyeshadows. Look at this shade. This is one of the most interesting neutrals, and I know that like this on a swatch it's very hard to judge that it's a very interesting neutral. You're just like, oh, it looks like a good old, you know, mid-tone bronzy brown, but it's so much more than that. I'm sorry, you guys, you're probably going to hear the same adjectives over and over again, but there's really only so much in my vocabulary that I can use to describe beautiful, gorgeous, magnificent, fabulous, and so on and so forth. So we're going to continue to be recycling through these adjectives, just so you know. All right, another stunning neutral metallic eyeshadow from Pat McGrath Labs comes from the Interstellar Icon quad. This is a quad that was released for holidays 2019. And I recall when this quad arrived and I thought that all the rage would be focused on this shade here, the shade Hypnotic, because the shade Hypnotic is the duochrome, is the blue purpley eyeshadow. It looked so beautiful on the swatches. And then I remember the demo that I did for this video. You can go back and rewatch it, and I think you can genuinely see my reaction to this eyeshadow, the shade Golden Polaris, this one here, when I first applied it on my lids. I think I literally gasped, and for the rest of the video I was just flabbergasted and I couldn't believe how beautiful this eyeshadow is. So it literally stole the show for me and I've never looked back. I opened this eyeshadow palette and my eye immediately goes to Golden Polaris. Golden Polaris is another one of those stunning neutral shades. Golden Polaris is a light champagne with, I don't know whether you can see, I will try to shift my hand here in the light so that you can catch all the different flips that this eyeshadow has. But it has a little bit of pink sparkle, it has a little bit of gold, and the base of it is a champagne color, but the shine on it is so intense, and just the texture and the formula and how creamy it is just absolutely gorgeous on the lid. Your whole face literally starts to like glow and be filled with life because of how intensely like reflective this eyeshadow is. I love this eyeshadow with an intense passion, and that passion will never die. Okay, my next favorite metallic eyeshadow comes from the Midnight Sun palette, and this is an eyeshadow that again is a very beautiful neutral shade. I wouldn't describe it to be as, you know, unique and eye-catching as, for example, Metallurgy or Golden Polaris, but it is the type of neutral eyeshadow that makes me feel just very confident. One of my favorite like neutral looks that makes me feel confident comes from the Midnight Sun palette, and it is basically this quad over here. And the eyeshadow that I'm referring to is this one here. This is the shade Bronze Eclipse. Now, Bronze Eclipse has actually come back a few times since the release of this palette. It is, I think, now part of her mini, one of those like teeny tiny mini palettes. Nicola, you even eat. And it was also part of Celestial Odyssey, but like the shade in Celestial Odyssey is an entirely different eyeshadow, so I'm actually not sure why they're called the same. They're just not the same eyeshadow. But I really love the undertones of this shade because it is just such an elegant, like bronzy neutral shade. It doesn't really have any special shifts to it, it doesn't really have too much complexity, it's just a pretty straight up metallic eyeshadow. But I really like how it looks against my eye color. I think it looks beautiful paired with the rest of the neutrals over here in this quad, and I just always really enjoy using it. My next favorite metallic eyeshadow from Pat comes from this Star Wars 6-pan palette that I received as a gift from a very generous friend of mine who was basically decluttering it because she bought the Celestial Divinity palette. So, in case you don't have the Star Wars palettes, both this palette and the other 6-pan that I'm also going to show you in a little bit are featured in the Celestial Divinity palette. So, but the shadow that we're talking about today is this one. This is the shade Galactic Gold, and I did not know that I was missing a galactic gold in my life until I got it. I never would have been able to tell what a glorious eyeshadow this is just based on the swatches or, you know, photos of the eyeshadow palette itself. This eyeshadow to me is like the fraternal twin of Golden Polaris because they kind of give me the same like vibes in terms of the texture of this eyeshadow. They are both very creamy, very reflective, very like intensely shiny, but they have a slightly different duochrome shift on them. So while Golden Polaris is a bit more of like a light gold champagne pink, this one is a light champagne bronzy light green, like light lime green duochrome. I don't know whether all of these shifts are at all coming across if I'm moving my hand here in the light. This eyeshadow is spectacular and basically gives me the same feels that Golden Polaris does. Again, such an interesting neutral eyeshadow. Mother really knows how to get me with her neutrals. We are basically halfway through my top 20 now because this is going to be eyeshadow number 10 and it comes from the Divine Rose 1 palette. And the eyeshadow in question is again another sort of like lovely neutral with very interesting undertones to it, and that is the shade Lovelace over here, which you can appreciate I have loved quite a bit because it has quite the dent to it. So this is Lovelace. Lovelace is again such an interesting like sort of cool toned lavendery neutral shade. It's sort of a darker, deeper neutral shade, but what makes this eyeshadow so interesting is that again, there's like depth to the tones and like different things going on depending on how you shift it. It has a little bit of like a almost browny, bronzy base and this cool toned mauvey, lavendery purple overlay. I have to say, this is not one of her most like intensely metallic reflective eyeshadows. By comparison, Golden Polaris and Galactic Gold were so much more intense in that aspect, but what I really like about this eyeshadow is just what interesting nuances it has to the tones and how interesting it looks on the lids. Sticking with the Divine Rose palettes, let's open up the Divine Rose 2 palette, which houses another one of my absolute favorite metallic shades. It's sort of like a more purpley iteration, and I think a little bit more of a shiny iteration of Lovelace from the Divine Rose 1 palette. So while the Divine Rose 1 palette and Lovelace lean a little bit cooler, a little bit more neutral, almost like murkier, you know, colder undertones to it, it's like warmer, more vibrant and summery counterpart is housed in this palette, and this is the shade Eleganza. Eleganza I think is also a shinier shade by comparison. Let me swatch Eleganza for you. Eleganza is everything that it promises in its name. Eleganza is elegant. Eleganza is beautiful. Eleganza is soft. Look at this gorgeous, like warmer toned purple with almost like a pink shift to it. Okay, let's open up another palette that houses several of my favorite metallic eyeshadows from Pat McGrath. And who is surprised and shocked that Citrine Envy is one of my favorite metallic eyeshadows from Pat? I mean, I don't know that I really need to say much more than just move my finger in the light a couple of times, and you will know why I love this eyeshadow so much. This eyeshadow is magnificent, not only because it is green, but because it has this like intense metallic sheen to it. This is a beautiful, like warmer toned, lighter green with a very strong, I would say, golden overlay on it. It is so beautiful and so glowy. This is the type of eyeshadow that makes your heart flutter and you want to write haikus about it. There are actually two more of my favorite metallic eyeshadows in Celestial Odyssey, so I'm going to keep it around for a bit. Another one of my favorites is this shade here. This is the shade Corrupt Copper. I think Corrupt Copper was first released as a single. You would be surprised how many of these like metallic eyeshadows I actually already own as singles, but I also have them in palettes, and I am unwilling to part with my singles because I love these eyeshadows so intensely. And an eyeshadow that I love intensely is this beautiful, vibrant, like mandarin orange with a golden duochrome to it. Corrupt Copper gives me the same feeling as if you were to like sink your teeth into a juicy tangerine. This is another eyeshadow that I really love to use as a one and done because when the light hits it straight on, you can see a little bit of like those like orangey, goldeny flecks to it. But then when you shift your head in a certain light, it almost looks like it has a bit of like a richer, reddish, brownish base to it. And my final favorite metallic eyeshadow in the Celestial Odyssey palette is another one of those beautiful, unique, like neutral eyeshadows that only Mother Pat knows how to do. This is the shade Bronze Nova. Bronze Nova is just glorious. Let me swatch it and then start shifting my hand into the light so that you can hopefully catch all the different tones that are going on here. So the base tone of this eyeshadow, I want to say, is like a lighter bronzy brown, but the overlay is a green pink shift. And there's a little bit of sparkle to it, so this eyeshadow is a bit more sparkly. It's very reflective. It's not just a straight up metallic, it has a little bit of like shimmer running through it. But I adore Bronze Nova. When I want to do a neutral eyeshadow look but I still want it to be interesting and shifty, Bronze Nova is the first eyeshadow that would come to mind. So pretty. Okay, we're now at eyeshadow 15 and I'm grabbing my Utopian Dream palette in order to show you this beautiful brown shade here, which is called Bronze Desire. I actually did a look like literally just a few days ago featuring this eyeshadow, so if you're interested in seeing it in action, I can link the video up in the cards for you. It's the latest video in my pet pairing series. But the reason I love this eyeshadow so much is it has a beautiful creamy texture to it, but what I really like is the specific undertone of brown that you're getting in here, because it is a rich, very like copper red toned brown. And I always feel like these like reddish copperish brown shades really bring out my eye color, because I think the brown, I have brown eyes, and I think there's like a certain redness to the brown tones of my eyes. I promise I'm not a vampire. I just think that the undertone of red that my eyes are has a little bit of a red base to it. So these kind of eyeshadows really intensify that, and for whatever reason just look so beautiful when I put them all over my lids. I love Bronze Desire. It is so gorgeous. As you can see, it's not like super reflective, it's not super shimmery or anything, but it is just such a beautiful tone of brown. I love it. In Moonlit Seduction you have an eyeshadow that I absolutely adore. It is more of a classic interpretation of a taupe gunmetal eyeshadow, but it is such a beautiful iteration of that. The shade I'm referring to is this one here. This is the shade Platinum Dusk, which I would arguably also call my favorite eyeshadow in this palette. We are still going to do a video where I show you all of my favorite shades in each palette, but Platinum Dusk is definitely a contender for that. Platinum Dusk is gorgeous. It is more of a classic, like I said, interpretation of a taupe shade because it has those, I don't know, like more silvery gunmetal sparkles to it over a very cool toned brown base. But it is an absolutely magnificent interpretation of the shade. While this doesn't quite have the same like unique undertones and shifts that Divine Mink has, I think this still has, you know, character of its own. It looks beautiful on the lids, and I just really enjoy this eyeshadow. Especially in the winter, it was one of my favorite like lid shades. Before we move on, apparently I forgot one of my favorites from the Celestial Odyssey palette. How very silly of me. And that is this eyeshadow here, the shade Galactic Glow. I'm not usually a fan of pink eyeshadows, but this one really has me converted because the pink tone is like this very like light warmer shade of pink, and it has this strong golden overlay, and oh, it really glows on your eyelids. Beautiful eyeshadow. Of course, Daring Dandy from the Bridgerton 2 palette is one of my favorite metallic eyeshadows. If nothing else, look at the indentation this eyeshadow has, and I've only really had it for about a year. This is such a beautiful, true, like mint green metallic eyeshadow. I picked up a little bit too much here, so let me sort it out for you. This reminds me a little bit of like a pistachio, like a little pastel pistachio color. It is so pretty, and I love using this eyeshadow as an inner corner highlight. It looks really pretty on the lids as well, but for whatever reason I usually reach for this when I'm doing a neutral look and I want a little like pistachio green moment in my inner corners. Okay, last but one eyeshadow is from the other Star Wars palette that I have here. This is the 6-pan in Dark Galaxy, I want to say, and this house is another one of those really unique eyeshadows from Pat, and the shade in question is called Odyssey. Odyssey is an eyeshadow that I find so difficult to describe because it looks like it's just like a purpley pinky shade. In certain lighting it does look quite like a magenta pink, but in a different lighting it almost looks like a bronzy green. Look at that. Isn't that one of the most interesting eyeshadows that you have ever seen? And it looks just as interesting when you put it on your eyelids. I think this eyeshadow is so incredibly special. And last but certainly not least, we have this beautiful eyeshadow over here, the shade Eternal Amour, which I would qualify as one of my top favorite metallic eyeshadows from Pat McGrath, because it is a pink eyeshadow, and I'm not a huge fan of pink eyeshadows, as I have mentioned on quite a few occasions, including once in this video, but there is something about the tone of this eyeshadow that makes it so flattering. I don't know if it is because it has a little bit of like neutrality to it, or the specific like depth of the shade of pink, or the shine that it has. I really cannot explain to you exactly why, but I find this pink to be so appealing to me. This is the most like attractive pink that I've seen in Pat McGrath's collection to me personally. A lot of her other pinks are just too offensively pink for my taste, but this one has like an elegance to it that I truly appreciate. Alright, and this concludes my top 20 metallic eyeshadows from Pat McGrath Labs, something that I should probably have mentioned in the beginning of this video, so I'm really hoping that you stuck around. You are probably wondering why I have not included any of the metallic shades from Pat's Quints, so the Star Wars Quint or the Bronze Bliss Quint. I consider these eyeshadows to be a completely different beast, a different category of like formula. I don't want to put them together with her regular metallics because I feel like they're going to blow a lot of her regular metallics out of the water. They're just a different texture and a different formula to me, so I didn't feel like it was right to include them in the same video. So that is why you haven't seen any of those eyeshadows be featured in this video. Anywho, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I'm not hoping that you're going to share your top 20 or even top 10 metallic eyeshadows from Pat McGrath with me, but if you feel compelled to share your top 3 or top 5 with me in the comment section below, I would love to know what those are. As usual, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!